My name is, excuse me. My name is Lori Glickman. I'm the Associate Director at the National Transit Institute. I'm here to welcome everyone to this afternoon session. We really appreciate you being here. Just a few things before we get fully started. So we're here today for NTD's data feedback session for full reporters. On behalf of the National Transit Institute, I welcome you and thank you so much for participating. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. We are pleased to have today Tom Coleman and Michael Kay as our presenters. Tom Coleman is the Federal Transit Administration's National Transit Database, NTD, Program Manager based in Washington, D.C. He has over 10 years of experience working for multiple federal agencies and DC's Department of Transportation before joining FTA. One of his focus areas and the focus of today's webinar is to improve the value and usefulness of NTD data to the transit community. Michael Kay is a transportation planner with the U.S. Department of Transportation Volpe Center based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Michael joined the Volpe Center in 2007 and supports various offices in the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Railroad Administration, in addition to FTA. Michael has previously facilitated FTA focus groups at the annual Transit Asset Management, Multimodal Roundtable, and the Transportation Research Board annual meeting. For today's presentation, you can ask a question at any time by please typing it in the Q&A box. We prefer this over the chat because we can keep a better record of the questions that are being asked and whether or not they have been answered. If you don't see the Q&A box right now, it might be under more ... on your menu bar. It might be at the bottom or top of your screen, depending on your individual settings. We ask that you can use the chat box, but you will be encouraged by me probably to put your question in the Q&A box. I think that's all my housekeeping. I'm here. If you have any questions, I will put my contact information in the chat box in case you want to message me or anyone at NTI, question about another course, anything, we can take care of that. And I guess that's it. And I'm now going to turn it over to Tom and Michael.
Thank you, Lori. And hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tom Coleman, and I am FTA's NTD Program Manager. I'm joined today by Michael Kay from Volpe, and we'll be switching off presenting slides. Next slide. The objectives of today's webinar are to gather stakeholder feedback on existing uses of NTD data from people such as yourselves, and to identify user needs for the future of NTD data products. Our intended audiences are large transit operators, full reporters, small transit operators, small urban and tribal reporters, and subrecipients. This webinar is the first in 3, and today's focus is larger transit operators. And we have over 100 attendees from 43 states today, which is a fantastic turnout. And we're very excited to have you. Today's webinar assumes some prior NTD knowledge. If you don't have any, you're welcome to stay, but there's also some NTD introductory webinars on NTI's webpage. We'd be happy to share with you. Next slide. Now I need to read a disclaimer to you. The contents of this document do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This document is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under law or agency policies. Grantees and subgrantees should refer to FTA's statutes and regulations for applicable NTD requirements. This session is being recorded and feedback is not anonymous as we're recording it. If you do wish to provide private feedback, you can reach out to us at the email address listed here, ntdfeedback@dot.gov. This email address will remain open for the next week to receive and integrate your feedbacks and comments among those others on today's webinar. And next, I'll turn it over to my co-host, Michael, with some additional information about today's webinar.
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Just wanted to elaborate a little further on the structure for today's feedback session. So this is designed as a virtual listening session. Obviously, given the current times, we're unable to see you all in person and hope to be able to see you in the future. And if we were doing this in person, we'd probably be in a large ballroom and we'd be able to see each other and interact a little bit more directly. We're going to do our best to do this virtually, and we've set up a structure that we hope provides you various options for providing your feedback. But I want to just elaborate a tiny bit further about the different options. So first, we'll utilize a series of polls throughout today's webinar. We certainly encourage your active participation throughout with any of these mechanisms. We're here for you to hear your feedback. So the more engaged and involved you are in providing us the feedback that we are seeking, the better we can attend to your needs. Additionally, as Lori noted, there is both a chat box and a Q&A box on your screen, depending on your formatting. I believe it's on the bottom of your screen, certainly by default. We can use both of those boxes a little bit interchangeably. As Lori indicated, if you have questions, it is preferable that you use the Q&A box, though certainly if you do insert a question into the chat box, we'll be able to attend to it. We also only just have the one singular chat box, however, and we have many, many questions for you. That'll require that when we are seeking your input for a particular question, that hopefully you're able to provide an answer in the time allotted, just so we can understand more clearly the direct question to which you're responding. And for that reason, we are going to take pauses at various points throughout for a minute and a half. We'll let you know in advance because we want to give you the time that you may need to provide some independent thought to some of the questions. So we'll certainly let you know in advance, but we are willing and happy to be here and allow for some dead air time to give you some time to provide those responses. I think that is all. Again, do encourage you all. We have over 100 people with us, which is great, and we're doing this all via text or chat and no audio. So please do be prepared to provide your feedback through each of these three mechanisms, in addition to an email address that you can use. Tom will correct me, I think it's NTD feedback at dot.gov. We'll remind you of that in just a moment. So we'll start out with our first couple polls, and we can only pull these up one at a time. Give me a second to launch this poll. Okay, you should see a poll on your screen. This is inquiring about your affiliation. And if you do have a response of other and care to note in the chat box what is your affiliation, provide a little more clarity there, we welcome that. We'll give everyone another 10 seconds or so. I can see that most of you have answered. And while you are answering, I'll note that once we do close the poll, the polls, plural, I may share the responses, I may not. It's all anonymous. It'll represent as anonymous feedback, so there won't be any direct attribution. Thank you to Lisa. I see you providing clarification on your affiliation. Most of you have participated, and I will say it's quite a great response rate. So let me just end that. Happy to share the results with you. We have predominance of government agencies. We have a few private operators and a few members of the private sector or trade groups, and about 10% of you are from another affiliation. So thanks again for participating there. Let me switch over to our second poll, which I will launch now. I'm just curious to know how many NTD related webinars you participated in previously, whether this is your first, whether you've participated in one webinar in the past year or fewer in the past year, or more than one in the past year. I tell you already, it's an interesting diversity of responses, which is good. And I appreciate the promptness with which you're responding. We're getting a very good response rate and very quickly, so thank you. We'll leave that open for 10 more seconds. So we're just about done getting our feedback. Happy to share the results as well. For about a quarter of you, it's your first NTD webinar, and welcome. For 41% of you, you've participated in the past year in either 1 or 0, but if it's 0, you have participated previously. And for 35% of you, you've attended at least or more than 1 in the past year. So thanks again for that. Let me stop sharing that and go back to our presentation. Okay, just want to run through the agenda for today. We have 5 main sections. First, we will let you know what we know about the NTD and NTD data. So Tom's going to present a bit about our known users and our known uses of NTD data. Then we'll take a review of some of the known published, existing published data products, some of which you may be familiar with, some of which you won't. We'll have some poll questions inquiring about that. Then we'll switch to talking a bit about what are your current needs that the NTD is or is not currently meeting. That'll be a series of, again, poll questions and also soliciting your direct feedback via the chat box and certainly the Q&A. Then we'll pivot to future needs, how you can envision the industry changing and how you can foresee your own needs of the NTD and NTD data evolving. And then with time remaining in our 90-minute period, we're happy to open it up for broader discussion and Q&A. Notice we didn't put timestamps on this. We want this discussion to flow pretty naturally. We have some sense on the back end of how long we anticipate spending on each section, but we're gonna allow this to flow naturally. And if we're having a good discussion, we'll stick with it. So with that, I think I'm turning it back over to Tom to talk about known users and uses.
That's correct. Thank you, Michael. Now, before we dive in further, hopefully everyone found the polling easy. We're going to be doing a lot of polling, but we'll mix it up. So we'll be gathering your interactive feedback. And I see some really great chats, people from around the country welcoming. So welcome everyone. Hopefully get to meet some fresh faces. And it looked like some people this is their first webinar with NTI. But let's start exploring the NTD a bit. If you could, next slide. Michael. NTD was created by Congress in 1974. It's a database housing data for financial, operating, and asset condition data of America's transit systems. It is maintained by FTA. It includes a website to provide access to data products for the public. Today, we'll be discussing a sample of these products, their uses, and future alterations to these products to make them useful for you and others in the future. This session is really about you and listening to what your uses are. I'm going to be presenting some known uses, but really this is about you. Next slide. So who are the users of NTD data right now? We had the demographic poll up earlier, but here again is the list of some of our external stakeholders. First, we have government agencies. Second, we have private operators. Third, private sector companies or trade groups. Fourth, academic. There could even be others, and there are, but these are some of the main groups that we know of. Next slide. Before we jump into specific uses with our files, here are some of the broad examples of the variety of NTD data uses here at FTA. We won't be able to touch on the first one today as it is largely set by Congress, but it is also one of the FTA core uses of NTD data, and that's apportionment. In addition to apportionment, NTD data is used for tracking service consumed, demand data such as rides or unlinked passenger trips, tracking service supplied, such as vehicle revenue miles or VRM, monitoring safety data, collecting transit asset management data, and reviewing financial data. These are all the uses that FTA at least uses. Next slide. So what are the other non-FTA uses of NTD data? Based on our knowledge and experience, these are some of the uses you or others, non-FTA users, might be using it for. Research on the transit industry, research responding to media inquiries, peer benchmarking, or others. And hopefully we can explore some of these today and get a better sense of what everyone is using NTD data for. Next slide. Now let's get into some more details about the data products themselves. So what are these things that are being used? Next slide. Now here's the NTD Data Products website. I'm taking a screenshot here with the URL or website link is at the very bottom of the page. And it's really the first step to understanding the NTD data products. This website has a toggleable file feature, which has a ton of NTD files. There are probably thousands on here if you click through and kind of try to search through and filter to various files. Today, we're only becoming a subset. We only have an hour and a half. I'm not going to keep you on for 24 hours and go through all of them. 3 categories we're going to be going through today are data tables or annual data tables, which are Excel files. And we're going to be looking at the 2019 data sets, as these right now are the most current. We're right now finalizing the 2020 data, but 2019 is currently our most recent data. So we're going to be looking at NTD data tables from 2019. Next slide. There were 14 data table files, and the first one, 2019 data tables, is actually a consolidated file. So there was 13 unique files. And we're going to start with the first one called 2019 vehicles. It's circled here in red. And let's do a deep dive on this file to understand maybe one possible use case of how you can use this data table file. Next slide. So the common use is just to understand basic descriptive statistics about transit vehicle counts and attribution of characteristics like age across the country or vehicle type. Here's a snapshot from the file, and these are the top agencies or NTD operators. The top one is New York City Transit, MTA, New York City. New York's a bit different from the other agencies, so I just want to look at the number 2 for a moment, which is Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. They have vehicles operating a maximum service, or VOMS, of 3,469 vehicles. That means that LA Metro has almost 3,500 transit vehicles operating in its fleet at peak service. And of these, 1,962 are buses, 383 are articulated buses, and further types not shown here to the right. You see more data points. And you can do the same thing with AMATA, with the Chicago, with CTA, SEPTA. So the use case here is to look up basic descriptive statistics, such as counts by vehicle type. And we hear from agencies very often that they want to research peers to understand what their fleets look like, what the age of those fleets. This file is geared towards giving you that information by putting it in a rank order based on fleet size. So although these are the top ones, you might say, I'm from a small transit agency. You could just go, if you find your own agency, the ones near and around those rows will have your peers, and you can then see the number of buses and what types, articulated, et cetera, are there. Next slide. An additional use case for this revenue vehicle data table file is to give you a distribution of the nationwide picture. So here's the same file, but with a different use. This is a histogram or bar chart. And you may have heard the term business intelligence or BI, or this visualization or BI tool gives you the aggregate or total nationwide display of the age of the nation's transit revenue vehicles. And you can see here the distribution has a long tail, which is just another way of saying there's a big hill and then it kind of like tapers off. And the mean age is around 7 or 8 years old. But you can see here it's a very wide distribution of ages for the vehicles. Next slide. Switching gears, let's go to another NTD data table. Here we'll go to metrics, and that's just another one of the 13. We just looked at revenue vehicles. Next slide. The data table file called metrics has a number of interesting data points. Here are 3 of these data points in the last 3 columns: fare revenues per unlinked passenger trip, cost per passenger, and fare revenue per operating expense, called recovery ratio or fare box recovery. And you'll notice here it's very interesting that the fare box recovery, obviously for different modes, vary widely. So the very top one, New York City Transit, and their heavy rail is 70%, as opposed to demand response, which would only be 2% here as shown. But this is where you'd find that very commonly asked for kind of statistic of like how much fare revenue per operating expense. And this is another use that we have for this file. Next slide. A last data table file I wanted to highlight is that 2019 funding sources data table. Next slide. So the use in this case is to get a nationwide snapshot of capital expenses. And this file provides that. So there's a tab, and this is one of the business intelligence kind of graphics. It's a pie chart, and it answers the question of how much federal, state, and local capital expenses are there in the nation's transit industry. And here you can see it's 31% for federal, 23% for state, and 21% for local. And I find this graphic very easy because we often get asked, what's the federal share of capital expenses and state expenses and local expenses? And this provides that answer or use case. With that, I'll turn it back to Michael.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Just give me 1 sec to get my screen oriented here. So we're going to turn now to a poll. We're really wondering your level of knowledge prior to today with these respective data products. So let me launch this one. We're trying to pack a lot in here. So I'm going to let this one breathe for a moment. First, I'll read out the question and then give you about a minute to respond. So the question is, what is your level of awareness and involvement with these data products prior to today, specifically the annual data table? So the first option is you're completely unfamiliar with them. The next couple of options are suggesting that you've never used them, but you are familiar with either some or all of them respectively. 3 more options noting that you use some of them and are unfamiliar or familiar with the others. And then lastly, you essentially know and are aware of and use all of these data products. So let's give everyone a good 30 seconds to digest the answer choices and provide an answer. While you're answering, certainly we would welcome any input into the chat box about how you're utilizing these data products, especially if you're utilizing in a manner that's different than Tom had indicated already. Or if you have any questions about these data products, certainly feel free to put them into the Q&A box as well. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. And like I said, I'll share the results of some, not others. I'm happy to share the results of these. So we have, again, quite a mix. About a quarter of you are unfamiliar with the data products. And again, therefore, very happy to have you join us and to learn a little bit more. About a quarter of you have not used them, but are familiar with at least some. About over 40% of you use at least some of them, and for the most part are familiar with at least some of the others as well. So really a good mix there. Let me stop sharing that poll and close out the poll. I'm going to just reference some of the chats that have come in, and I'll read out a couple as I'm seeing them. Peer agency reviews. Let's see, using the data products for peer-to-peer comparison review. So we're seeing a few responses to that effect. Compare with peers. We've compared peers for COVID-related impacts. So here's an instance where I'd like to pivot and bring up a poll that's kind of a revolving poll, if you will. Just give me a moment to pull that up. I gotta find my cross tabs. So I'm pulling up, so we're tailoring some of the polls to be generic in their construction. And actually, let me end that for a second. I want to provide some instructions here. Generic in their construction so that we can reuse them. So I'm going to pull up a poll that the question is simply, to what extent do you agree or disagree with the facilitator statement? So the statement that I'm posing to you is, actually, maybe I'll use the one below that. Let's try this one. So the question here, this will be simpler. What is your response to my question? And the question is, have you utilized the annual data tables for the purposes of peer reviews? So specifically peer reviews. Curious to know how many of you have utilized them for that use previously. Good, getting a lot of response here. So while you're answering, I just wanted, this is kind of the flow we're looking for. We want to, as we see an aggregation of comments come in, we want to be able to ask follow-ups. And so which we're doing here. And appreciate, again, your flexibility and participation. So again, one more time, the question is, have you utilized the annual data tables previously specifically for doing peer comparisons to other agencies? Let me go ahead and I'll give you 5 more seconds. And we'll close that out. I won't share the results, but about a third of you do. About 2/3 of you don't, or at least have not previously. So thanks again for answering that. Let me just see if any other pertinent chat box questions came in, and I can certainly reference these, of course, while Tom is speaking as well. This one, good. And we have people responding to some of the Q&As, including one of my colleagues, Rahi Patel. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom to talk about some of the non-Excel based data products.
Thanks, Michael. Next on our list is, as Michael said, non-Excel files. The NTD does not just produce Excel files, such as the data tables I showed you. There are 2 non-Excel NTD data products I'd like to talk about. The first is the National Transit Summaries and Trends, or NTST. The NTST is a PDF file. It's one of our annual data publications or products. The main goal of the NTST is to present and summarize data in an easy-to-read format and provide an overview of public transit in the United States that matches both quantitative and kind of qualitative text to match and interpret the data. And one of its main goals is visualization. So let's look at that use of visualization. Next slide. So shown here is an exhibit from the NTST. The NTST has, I'd say, like 60 to 70 exhibits. This is just one of them. And the scope of the NTST is 1 year of transit data. And here, I guess, just to kind of narrate what's going on the x-axis, you'll see the years. It comes from 2010 all the way through 2019. Again, we're still working on 2020 data. I heard might be some people interested in that. We're working on it with COVID. We want to get it right. So we're still working on that. But through 2019, you'll notice that it was interesting. So looking at by mode, we've split here the rail and non-rail trips. And you'll notice over the 10-year period, rail increased actually more than non-rail or bus, and now exceeded it in 2019. I don't have the data point for most recently after COVID, but this is one of the uses, is the exhibit and visualization of kind of over time, how did transit change? And we saw that rail trips rose from 4.6 billion to 4.94, and bus trips dropped from 5.3 billion to 4.8 billion. So that is one use case for our NTST. Next slide. Next, there's another NTD non-Excel data product I'd like to discuss, which is the NTD Data Publications Guide. This is another PDF document that the NTD team produces each year. In it, we describe how to use NTD data tables and other files or data publications where there's changes to data products from prior annual releases. There's also a matrix where file totals may not match exactly, and there's explanations as to why. And it's provided by NTD reporter type and file. And one of the main uses for me is reconciliation. So if I want to reconcile a data table total for financial or ridership, I can do that using the NTD Data Publications Guide. Next slide. To give you a little picture of how it looks, so here's that kind of reconciliation matrix I mentioned. This is from the 2019 revenue sources database file. The first row shows this file's total is $7.648 billion in total capital sources expended. The second data point it's trying to reconcile here is funding sources data table file. And that file we show 7.644 billion. So again, that's 7.648 billion as opposed to 7.644 billion, which is a difference of $4 million, which is close, but still that's different. So what's different? Why is there a perceived discrepancy? That is because in certain data products, such as time series, the NTD does not include entities such as intercity bus subrecipients, because these intercity bus subrecipients do not operate transit service, but they do receive FTA transit funding. We collect some financial data from them, but we don't collect ridership or other data. It's a small number of reporters, but that is the difference. So in one file, the top one, revenue sources database file, it's a little bit larger by $4 million. It includes that funding for intercity bus subrecipients of approximately $4 million. Because the NTD Data Publications Guide focuses on reconciliation, we try here to present an explanation for why, if you took these two files and tried to match them up, that again, that's the 2019 revenue sources database file and time series 1.3, those two would not necessarily line up. And with that, I'll give it back to Michael.
Sorry, I'm here. Obviously, I hit the wrong button, but we'll get back. Okay, so we're going to bring up the same poll inquiring about your level of knowledge of these particular products. So just give me a second. All right. There we go. Okay, so this is the same question as before. What is your level of awareness and involvement with these data products? So now we're specifically talking about the NTST, so that's the National Transit Summaries and Trends, and the NTD Data Publications Guide. And similar to last time, if you have in the chat, or if you have any questions in the Q&A, please feel free to submit. And in the chat pod, if you care to elaborate on how you're using these data products or any other useful information for us to hear, certainly welcome that. So I'll leave that up for about 10 more seconds, and I'll just tease the fact that we're getting a different set of responses here, which is good. Again, we're looking to find out what you're familiar with and what you're using and what you're not. It's very useful feedback. So 5 more seconds here. Okay, let me go ahead and end that. And happy to share this. We're trying to seek some transparency. So fewer of you are familiar with the NTST and the NTD Data Publications Guide. More than half of you are not familiar with them. About a quarter of you are familiar but have never used them. And another quarter of you, a little less than that, have used these products previously. So that's, again, very useful information for us to know, and hopefully we can come back to you and sometime in the future and we can show better utilization of these products. So now I have been able to manipulate my screen a bit better to see some of the Q&A, and I had a couple of follow-ups for everyone. I noticed some consensus around wanting to be able, and this is somewhat related to the first topic of the annual data table, which is fine. I'm seeing some consensus around wanting to be able to view peer data by specific NTD form. I think at least 3 of you concurred on that, but better than hearing it just from 3, I will, if you just give me a moment, I would like to pull up a poll just to take to assess that. And I will go with, just bear with me, go with 19. Oh, nice. Sorry, there we go. Sorry, give me 1 second. Apologies. Whoops, that's not the right one. Okay, let's just go with this. So the specific question is, would you find utility in being able to, sorry, let me clarify. Would you find utility in being able to view peer data by specific NTD form? Give you a few more seconds. Tom, it's about a third of the respondents are not sure. I think that may be indicative of not exactly knowing specifically what the utility of that may be. Are you able to speak at all to that?
The utility, I'd be curious to those who raised it. So I will tell you that the forms in the past have at different times been treated more like a tax return, in that there were specific line items with specific instructions from a data collection perspective. From the data product perspective, I actually don't know if we've ever reported the data in a way that would show like multiple agencies sort of like by form. A lot of our data products correspond to the form. So I guess my question is, it could be that we need better kind of branding or framing of our data. So the data products that are most like the individual forms are actually the database files. There are 40 or more of those. I didn't want to go into them today, in part because they are the most detailed and also the closest to like a record. I guess my question for everyone, or those who focused on the form presentation of the data products, do you use the database files? And did you know that they are like kind of there? Did you know that they are the closest representation they have? I'm just curious if what we're already doing now with the database files, it could be that we just need to better brand and market their usefulness and sort of even call them by their form name rather than the database files, which may have names that don't make it as clear as it could be which form they correspond to.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom, for that. I did want to also just first take a moment to acknowledge my colleagues, Rahi Patel and Noah Augustine, who are manning the Q&A, and a couple good questions have come in and they've been answered, but I just want to make sure to read them out, a couple of them out, so that everyone has the information. So in case you're curious, all three of these webinars, or these, we'll call them webinars, but these virtual listening sessions, focus groups, if you will, are going to have the same content. We are targeting different audiences, but certainly if you aren't able to attend a subsequent one, we're inviting you to this one. So joining this one should be sufficient for you all. If you're looking for a link to the presentation, Lori Glickman at NTI Notes, this is being recorded, as we mentioned, and we will post the presentation following the focus group today. Regarding the 2020 data tables and when they will be available, the data is being finalized, but no specific timeline yet. And then a couple of questions came in about, is this webinar appropriate for us? And and similar to my first comment a moment ago, we're happy to have you for this or any of the other webinars, any of the other focus groups that we're conducting, one more this week and one in early November. With that, checking the chat box one more time. Good. Okay, I think we've covered just about everything. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk about some of the monthly data files.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, and there's some great conversation and discussion going on. So here I am again, but I'm multitasking, trying to get everyone the information they need. But I'm really happy to have this level of engagement today. So the next is we went through the data tables and the non-Excel NTD data products. Now we're going to cover the monthly. The purpose and goal of the monthly data files are to provide more current data than our annual data collection. Only a small amount of data is collected each month, but we do publish regularly each month kind of a current snapshot of transit data across the country. The main use case for monthly data is providing a current version of that transit data, and it answers questions or use cases like how much has ridership decreased across the country. In March 2020, when we had COVID-19 first hit, how much has service decreased across the country in terms of vehicle revenue miles? In terms of the monthly data set, it's released with approximately 6 weeks of delay. So right now, if you go on our monthly data files, you will see the time period that ends August 31, 2021. So we don't have any September data, and it will be in early November that we will then publish around, let's say like November 10th, we'll have this data through September. So it's our current snapshot. Next slide. Sorry, I just kind of went through this, but just to recap, it's the most current data we publish, and it's useful if you want to get a current snapshot of data across the country. Next slide. So let's take a look at the monthly data file. Here you can see the monthly data file format. You can see a single agency. Here I've highlighted Tahoe Transportation District. And you can see that the number 726, that was the number of trips that Tahoe Transportation District had for a certain mode type of service. This was their directly operated demand response mode. And the subtotal with reduced and rural reporter estimates. So I've kind of screenshotted because it'd be difficult to show the entire file, but at the bottom of the file, we have these totals. And I've highlighted in red the most important total, which is the nationwide snapshot for that month. So in the month of August 2021, nationwide, there were 422 million trips taken on public transportation in the NTD. And I want to focus your attention on that row, but also that sounds like a lot, 422 million trips, but during COVID, it's actually, we look back at 2019 for the same month prior to COVID, and it was 49% below that, or it was 50% higher, so over 800 million trips then. And this is the sort of analysis that you can do with the monthly data files. It has a time series with columns corresponding to months and years, and you can, especially in COVID, see how much your peers, your own transportation agency, or the entire country has kind of lost riders by month. Next slide.
I think that's my cue. So we have a couple of poll questions. And actually, I'm realizing we missed a couple on our last go around. So if I may, I'm going to bring us back briefly to a point in time about 3 minutes ago. We had a couple of other questions about the NTST and NTD Data Publications Guide. So I'm going to pull up, actually, it's just as applicable here. So let me launch this one. So our monthly data products are released each month with currently about a 6-month lag, and wondering if that meets your needs. Certainly pleased to be able to note that we are looking to reduce that lag, and we're actively engaged in making that happen. So happy to offer that, but just curious, given the status quo, if those are meeting your needs at the moment. And keep that open. We still have some folks digesting that one, so for about 10 more seconds. While people are responding, Tom, it looks like more than a third, but fewer than a half aren't sure. Maybe that's an opportunity if you'd like to take up on it. Did you want to give an indication of the efforts that are being done to reduce that lag and how that may provide some benefit going forward?
Sure. I think the efforts that are ongoing to look at that, and what we're kind of looking at is, especially for those that aren't sure, I guess, do you have a need for kind of current ridership data? And if so, I guess, where are you turning to? Could be you're turning to APTA, but we also have our own ridership file that we produce, and we just want to make, we're not sure if there is a need, but if there is, how can we best fill it? I know during COVID, we were getting questions from our management and from others about current data. And so there's a kind of a question of whether we need to look at potentially even shrinking that 6-week lag to as soon as possible. It could create other pressures, but that's the balance we're looking at. Is the benefits, is that worth the costs?
Great, thanks, Tom. I have 2 more poll questions here. Let me relaunch. So for the 3rd time, we're going to ask about, again, your level of awareness and involvement with these data products. And now we are talking specifically about the monthly data products. Let me just get us back to where we were. So with regard to the monthly data products, are you familiar with them? And while you're answering, certainly in the chat box, feel free to note how reduced lag in the monthly data report outputs may benefit you, or how it's a hindrance currently. Again, FTA is currently seeking to reduce that lag, and we're curious to know how you may benefit from that, besides the obvious. So let me go ahead and close that. We have a little more familiarity with these than with the NTST, but still actually about the same. So about a half unfamiliar, half a quarter haven't used them, but are familiar, and about a quarter have used these the monthly data products and are at least familiar with some or all of the others. And they'll go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Oh no. Once you're done with the poll analysis, I have a good question I'd like to.
Sure. Let me just get in one more, and then we can. I'll turn it back to you. So let's see if I make sure. Oops, I gotta scroll up. So this one is a little bit outside the box here, but hypothetically, if FTA were to collect just 1 week's worth of data each month and use that to estimate the remainder of the month's data, would that meet your needs? I'll leave that open for another 10 seconds or so. And I'll go ahead and close that out. And it appears that it's not necessarily meeting most of your needs, or that you're not sure. I could posit a guess that 1 week's worth of data may not be representative of the full month, and you're concerned about that. However, in the chat box, feel free to indicate why that would or would not meet your needs. Just again, FTA is curious to know about that. While we're waiting chat input on that and other questions, Tom, I'll turn it back to you. You had a comment to make?
No, I think this is exactly what because I think someone had foreshadowed that kind of like the usefulness of the. Here, let me go on camera. Sorry. No, this is exactly the discussion. I'm seeing folks kind of, there's sort of both an interest in a shortening of the lag, but maybe not if it's estimated. And I think that's where we were kind of balancing. We're investigating the feasibility of whether we could even collect. I know this is focused on data products, but can we collect data earlier, or is it just operationally infeasible? And that's what we're considering right now. The estimate would be kind of like a balancing of that. Maybe we could collect some snapshot. And someone said, you're going to collect data from us every week. Hopefully not. But if there is an impediment to even collecting 1 week of data, such as right now your contract is only submitted to you monthly, that would be something that would be interesting to know. And we're thinking about this. We know we're interested in, if there's interest in use of the earlier and shortened data for monthly data, but also kind of like the cost barriers or operational considerations that, or the usefulness. It would potentially be an estimate. So all of that, I'm very interested in what everyone has to say.
Great. Just looking at the chat input. A lot of interesting comments there. So we'll aggregate and come back to some of that for discussion in a little bit. In the meantime, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom to kind of give the combined summary of these three sets of data products. Tom, you might be on mute if you're trying to speak.
Sorry, I'm back. I was actually reading some of the comments. So to recap, we've highlighted the NTD data product type data tables, providing several examples: revenue vehicles, fare revenue, and capital funding. Second type of data product, non-Excel files, the NTST, and the NTD Data Products guide. And last, the monthly data files with the use case of obtaining ridership and some very good discussion around kind of the currentness of that data. Next slide.
Great. Yep. Thanks, Tom. So we're going to have a couple of aggregated polls with regard to the totality of the data products in just a second. So pull those up. Okay. So this is a similar question to what we've been asking previously, but now taking into account all of the data products presented already. What is your level of awareness and involvement with them prior to today? While you're filling that out, and we'll need another 15 seconds at least for that one. We are approaching the end of most of our formal content. We have plenty of more poll questions and audible questions for you about your existing and future needs. So plenty more to discuss. But I just want to encourage you to put your thinking caps on in terms of starting to wrap your head around not just what already exists, that has been the focus already, but what doesn't exist that may be useful to you in the future. That's the pivot we'll be making momentarily. So let me go ahead and close this poll out, and I'll share the results. These won't be surprising because it's really an aggregation of our earlier poll questions, but about a third of you have been unfamiliar with these data products previously. A quarter have not used them but are familiar, and about half of you do use some of these data products on a regular basis, but are either unfamiliar with the other products for about a quarter of you, or for the last quarter you are indeed familiar with the other ones, but don't utilize those other ones. So good diversity of input there. Close that out. Stop sharing it. Okay, got a couple more poll questions here. So on the same subject, for those of you who have used any of the aforementioned data products, at what scale have you utilized them? And this is one where you can submit multiple answers. Have you done analysis on a single agency, analysis on a small set of agencies, or a more broad analysis on all agencies, nationwide, essentially? And certainly if you have other uses, we'd be happy to field those as well. All right, got 5 more seconds there. And I normally I would welcome more input than we got, but then of course we're only canvassing those who have definitely utilized these products. So the response rate is totally appropriate. And I'll just share that it's a broad mix. About, again, among those of you who have utilized these products before, half of you have done analysis on a single agency, 2/3 of you have done analysis on more than one, but a small set of agencies, maybe, again, that peer comparison we're talking about. And about 1/6 of you have done analyses on the entire nation, or on all agencies. And of course, you could have provided multiple responses there. A couple more polls that are kind of on the aggregate here. So this is a question specifically about access. To what extent did you know how to access these data products prior to today? Whether you didn't know how to access them, whether you knew how to access some or knew how to access all. We'll leave that open for 5 more seconds. And we'll close that out. So a little more than 1/3 were not aware of how to access them. Half of you could at least access some, and 10% of you had already been familiar with and able to access, knew how to access all of the products. 2 more here, and then we'll move on. And we realize we're switching gears here a little bit, but really value the input. So this is asking about the complexity of these data products. On a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being not complex enough and 7 being too complex, how complex are these data products to utilize, to understand? If you care to nuance your answer a little bit, feel free to provide a chat. What is, if complex, why are they complex? Is it in the analysis? Is it in the access? Still see some folks responding, so we'll wait 10 more seconds. And we'll close that out. Pretty strong sample of a Bell distribution. Happy to share it. Right, a lot of you fell right in the middle in the sweet spot there of maybe the right balance of complexity, and some on the tails of them being not complex enough or too complex. So we may have found the sweet spot there. I believe one more poll in this section. So considering all of the data products that exist already, is the number of them the appropriate number? And that's on a scale as well. 1 being that there are too few of these NTD data products, 7 being that there are too many of these NTD data products. Let's give it 10 more seconds. And I'll go ahead and close that out. Similar Bell distribution there. So that's good to hear. With that, let's take a look at what we've been receiving by chat. Tom, I'm looking at some of this in real time myself, so I'll just take a moment to recap what I've seen, but if you're seeing anything that you wanted to respond to, feel free to chime in as well.
No, I think this is great. I really think it's interesting that there's like a good normal distribution around both complexity and number that is really informative and also helpful. I don't know if that means don't rock the boat, but to me it means there's a good mix of users. And I think to me the biggest takeaway so far has been that it seems like there's a good number of users that don't know how to access or haven't accessed our data products. And I actually want to ask them, more so for chats, because I think a lot of the recent polls have been only those who have had some use of the data products have been seeing some poll responses in that area. Meaning, I think so. If folks who really haven't used them in the past or didn't know they existed, any reactions, please chat them or tell me what your needs are. We've been polling a lot of those that are using them.
Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to read out a couple of the answers because I think it's just useful to hear. So some people note some challenges with the website. Interesting that complexity varies per product, and that's good for us to know. Trying to think, if time permitting and interest permitting, we could go back and pull you a little bit further about the complexity of each respective product. We didn't really, we pulled you on the utility, but a little less so on the complexity of per product. So we could do that a bit later on. Downloading the Excel is not optimal for what some particular agencies are seeking to do. Appreciate the comments that some people, of course, are familiar with some of these products, but not with others in there. We hope you're finding it useful to know about some of the ones that you hadn't been aware of previously.
But Michael, I think it also, I'm excited what's coming up, everyone, is we'll get some, where is the future? What maybe some ideas of what we've been seeing of possible, and we want to hear what your possibilities are too, so.
And that's actually probably a pretty good segue to where we're going here. I'm going to advance us. So again, we've been talking all along about the NTD data that is out there and that we're familiar with and the uses that we're familiar with. But again, we're kind of pivoting now to better understanding both the unknown uses of the data, in other words, uses of the data that you have employed already that haven't been referenced, and also thinking about your needs beyond what's currently available. These are just generic questions. We'll have specific polls in just a moment, but to wrap your head around the next series of questions, be thinking about how you use NTD data, be thinking about whether you run analyses not mentioned here, and some of you have already noted that, and be thinking about what should we know, what should Federal Transit Administration, FTA, know about how you use the data. So I'm going to advance us to specific polling and discussion about other existing needs that we may not be aware of. So we have 4 poll questions to ask, but I think this, before I pull them up, I think this may yield more reflection from you. So what I may do is, and I alluded to this earlier, that we may kind of go radio silent for a little bit of time. I'm going to pull up each of these polls, but then I'm going to actually pause for maybe even a full 60 seconds to see if you have some chat input that would be valuable to us. So let's see how this works. Let me pull up the next poll. So question is a simple one, but curious to know the nuance of your answers. Have you ever sought information from NTD that wasn't available? Yes, you have. Maybe that you've sought information that you could not find, however, you weren't sure if it was available, or no, you haven't. And I am, not easy for me to stay quiet for a full moment, but I am going to mute myself for a full 60 seconds while you finish answering the poll. And if you have some thoughts that you care to add to the chat box, please do submit those. So I will go on mute and catch up with you in just a moment. Okay, welcome back. Let me first share the results of that poll. So good news is not many of you have sought information from the entity that wasn't available, but about half of you have sought information that, though you couldn't find, you couldn't necessarily conclude that it wasn't available. And 39% of you have not sought information that wasn't available. So that's good. It means we're doing reasonably well, but could be doing better. And for how we could be doing better or how we could be improving the NTD, let's take a look a little at some of the chats that have come in. So let's see, I want to get back to where I was. Let's see. Okay. Great. Okay. So somebody commented that that they review information for their own district to make sure it's correct. I have a question about, is data available through Power Query? And there's some more there from Sherry's input from a couple minutes ago. Ultimately, I'll defer to Tom on that, but put a pin in that for a moment while I take a look at some of the other responses. Let's see here. Oftentimes, my biggest challenge is not finding an agency's data, but the proportion of a data input allocated to a UZA or an urbanized area. So thank you for that input. Would be more helpful to see more cost-related data. Had a project where they found that similar size agencies through the data, but reached out directly to get operator-related cost data. That's good. That's good feedback for us. And thanks, Christian, for responding back to Sherry that with regard to Power Query, it does depend on how the API is built. So a couple of back and forths on different ways of querying the data. And I also saw a couple questions coming through the Q&A that I didn't want to neglect. They've been answered, but I just want to see if anything denotes a response here. Give me 1 second. Great. This may need some follow-up, but I'll still read it out from Roy. Roy still has a limited understanding of how data can be accessed and what it's used for. I think a basic introduction to the NTD database would be very helpful to private carriers in particular. So Tom, not to put you on the spot, but I know that there are archived various webinars and introductions to the NTD, if you wanted to tout any of those, and or if you had any thoughts on some of the different querying software out there.
Yeah, sorry, was there for different query softwares? I saw a lot on Power Query and some other ones. We don't have a platform-specific approach right now to how we put out our files. I'd say we try to put them out. I think they're all Excel, meaning .xlsx files, or XLSM, meaning macro-enabled Excel files. I think if there are features that Microsoft Power Query offers, like you'd like the direct query capabilities, and for APIs, I think right now we have heard a number of requests for data collection APIs. I just want to be clear, understand when people are referencing APIs, you actually want to run, for instance, like Python or R, and then issue a command like with GTFS where you can kind of go out and grab. Are you trying to send us your data through an API, or you're trying to consume it, like you want an API for all the data products?
If you'd like, Tom, I could use one of our generic polls to query that. Let me.
Yeah, I see get post. You know, this is technical. No, this is good. Yeah, I'd say this is answering my question. So I didn't know if we have super advanced data users using direct queries, but kind of very advanced kind of issuing query commands. We have not yet like identified an API or how we do it. Well, right now I'm just interested in knowing if there's interest in an API for data products, and it sounds like yes, get and post. So that's great. Everyone else who is that savvy, please let us know, because now is the time.
So Tom, I'm prepared to pull up the question, the generic question, which will have a yes answer, a no answer, and an I'm not sure. Can you, once I pull it up, can you clearly just distinguish what that specific question again, and we'll see if we can get some real-time response on it. So I'm pulled up the poll again. Tom, can you once again just read that, iterate that question on which we're seeking feedback?
Yes, the distinct question is, are you interested in application programming interface or advanced data product support from the NTD, where we would have, for instance, a URL, and you would need, really script or code to take in the data pipeline from the NTD. That would be so are you interested in a data product API in that meaning?
Great. Thanks for that. Well, I see responses coming in. And let's give that another 10 seconds or so. Well, I think we definitely identified one particular interest for applications, because 43% of you are potentially interested in that. 14% of you know, and 43% aren't sure, maybe not quite sure what the utility would be, but since you didn't answer no, you're at least open to it or curious to know what opportunities it may avail. So that's very useful feedback. Thank you very much for that. Let me now bring up our next poll question, and this one won't be any kind of a gotcha. This one's already created. None of these are gotcha, but the distinction is just the ones that we're using to pivot. We want this to feel like we're all together and that we can pivot. That's what a focus group's all about. So this is going to be a similar question to the last one, but it's a little bit nuanced. I'll launch it now. We asked before about had you sought information that wasn't available. This is honing in more so on your ability to access or export data. Have you ever sought information from the NTD that you had trouble, that you knew was there, but you had trouble accessing or exporting? And I'm pleased to say that doesn't appear to be a problem for most, at least for 3/4 of you. So that's just a good check on that. Certainly, if you are responding yes and care to elaborate, we'd be happy to field that in the chat box about if you are able to isolate what the problem was in accessing or exporting, or maybe you couldn't. Maybe you could just indicate what you were trying, what you were trying to access or export that you knew was there, that you had trouble with. Operator error, yes, that happens. All right, I'm going to end that poll, and I'm going to move to the next one. So this is another multiple answer one. If applicable, please select any reasons why NTD data has confused you in the past, be it formatting issues, be it the query itself yielded data or values that you didn't understand, or other reasons. And again, certainly welcome input in the chat box. Great, we'll go ahead and close that out. I'll share those results. Start from the bottom up. We didn't get too many responses of others, so I think we at least honed in on, to the extent that there are reasons why data has been confusing. I think we did hone in on the two main reasons, and with them being predominantly that the query yielded data or values that you didn't quite understand how to interpret, and to a slightly lesser extent, formatting issues. So thanks again for that feedback there. We have one more poll in this set, and then we will also pause again for any further input on this topic. So, are you aware of how to contact FTA with suggestions or recommendations for NTD improvements? While you're responding, I'll just read out a couple of responses from the chat box, noting that it would be great to have access for beginner and advanced users. Many agencies have a need for access for both, for beginner users and advanced users. I think part of that is an encouragement that the interfaces and the outputs are not just available and actually accessible to everyone, but able to be interpreted and utilized by all various sets of users. And noting a comment that it'd be nice if all reports were tabular, having separate quote unquote boxes in Excel for separate data types, as opposed to just being a table. That's useful input. One person notes they usually email their NTD analyst when they have questions. It's good to know. I'll go ahead and close that poll, by the way. And about a third of you know who to contact or how to contact FTA. About a half of you don't, and a little less than a sixth of you aren't sure. So I think there's more that we can be doing at FTA to make sure that you know not just who to contact, but who to contact and for what purposes. So it's very useful feedback. So let me close that out. So before moving on to talking about future needs that we maybe can't, some of which we can anticipate and some of which we can't, I do want to just pause for, again, another moment to allow any of you to provide chat input or questions on any of the recent polls or threads about kind of existing needs. So I will again mute myself for a moment, and it's kind of open floor for comments and questions, at least for a moment or two. Okay, we're gonna table that chat pod input and make sure we get through the rest of our slides, and then we can come back to final Q&A. So with that, I will turn it back over, no, I take it back, it's still with me. So pivoting towards possible data products. Well, actually, Tom, I think we're gonna pivot here. Let's move on to 38, and then we can come back to 37 if that's all right, Tom. So we're gonna be looking at possible data products for the future, and Tom's gonna introduce a couple, and then we'll circle back to other ideas. Go ahead, Tom.
Great, thank you so much. Couple options, and we started with the open-ended. So we're looking at improving geospatial capabilities for the NTD, including mapping. Currently, we have the ability to map locations of NTD reporters, locations of reportable segments via address, and safety and security events in the major reports, the SNS 40. Next slide. Here is, for example, a visual. I think that's better than 1,000 words of kind of the NTD profiles. So the Bureau of Transportation Statistics right now already kind of provides some geospatial business intelligence. These are NTD reporters across the country. You'll notice clumps or globs around major urban areas, and particularly in the California and the Northeast, Southeast. I guess we haven't pinned down exactly how we could improve or the particular areas where we want to add geospatial capabilities to the NTD. And I think that's, please put in the chat box or ask us questions. I'll try to get through all these and then open up for a minute for Q&A. We're approaching our time, but this is a visual of that. Next slide. Okay. And last, I know someone mentioned APIs. We've been talking about APIs. We even had an impromptu question. So the general transit feed specification right now is a kind of open source collaborative effort that uses APIs to get certain data features standardized and across the country. The specification defines how to store transit data about stops, routes, and schedules. It doesn't currently contain ridership data, and we're looking at possibly using the GTFS for mapping, supporting web development applications, VRM, VRH, FOMS, and GTFS is, I would say, sort of an automated data flow or pipeline, and it is built around APIs. Whether the NTD is able, and when we're able to get an API, I'm not sure, but this is one possibility of sort of how we're looking at where transit APIs are currently being used. GTFS is one of the most well-known ones in the transit industry. So if either geospatial or GTFS, which has some geospatial capabilities, are of interest, those are two that we're kind of looking at and seeing what opportunities they open for the program.
Great. Thanks, Tom. So I will carry it forward. I'm going to slide back a sec, and we are being mindful of time. We have 6 minutes left, and we're kind of soon moving towards our last. We don't have that very much content left to share with you, so we are kind of moving towards general discussion and Q&A in our final few minutes. I did want to I wanted to probe this last bit of discussion, and certainly feel free to answer any of these questions or anything previous, but a couple of questions about future data products are thinking more generally about your future needs. Are there formats of data that would be more useful to you than you're currently getting? We talked a little bit about that already. Are there data points that would be useful to you? And again, this is sort of more forward-looking, not just based on your agencies today, but the evolution of your agencies going forward. And are there any process data products, summaries, fact sheets, et cetera, that would be useful for you? So those are general questions. We're not going to be polling you on those. I do have a couple very quick polls still to go through. We did want to make sure that we queried you specifically about geospatial and GTFS. So we're taking geospatial first. Wondering, I'll just make sure to get to that sort of a slide here. Do you have a need, or can you foresee a need for more of a geospatial component to NTD data? And I'll give you 5 more seconds there. And I'm going to close that. We have Mostly yes, some no, and I think some are still probably curious to know what what the possibilities are there. Certainly, it holds a lot of potential. I want to reissue this poll specific on GTFS. So let me just clear it out. I'm going to relaunch this poll and advance us just to make sure we're talking about the same things. So specific on general transit feed specification or GTFS, do you have a need for this type of resource? And we'll give you about 5 more seconds. Similar responses, maybe slightly more interest and awareness of GTFS over geospatial and the utility there, but it's very, very useful feedback. So I will go ahead and close that out. And let me proceed to our sort of open discussion and Q&A. We have about a minute for that. I'm going to read off a couple of chat pod inputs. I do want to clarify, the PowerPoint's not available, the recording will be available, and that, of course, will have the visuals. Fantastic. If NTD have a database of all GTFS feeds. NTD data is aggregated, so need to understand the utility better of the geospatial. It's all very good in input and feedback. I'm going to turn it over to Tom for us to, actually Tom, if I may, I'm gonna issue 2 quick polls and then turn it over to you to conclude. These will be quick. So wanted to get your feedback on your level of comprehension of the information shared today. Actually, I take that back. It's not the poll I wanted to use, excuse me. That would be, yes, this one, excuse me. Here we go. What was your level of understanding of NTD data before today's feedback session? So I'm sure you can guess what the next question is going to be, but it's useful for us to know if you've advanced your knowledge. So prior to today, what was your level of knowledge? We want to be quick here to give Tom enough time to wrap up. So just about 5 more seconds. And I will go straight to the last poll question, and then I'll be done. Tom, this is now having participated. Are you at the same level of understanding? Hopefully you're not at less understanding. It's possible. I can accept that, but hopefully it's at least where you were, if not advanced a little bit. So what is your level of understanding of NTD after today's feedback session? Give you 5 more seconds there, and close that out. Tom, I didn't give you a ton of time, but I do want to make sure to give you a moment to help us conclude here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Michael. We're out of time, everyone. I did want to note, Michelle Wright asked about the NTD reporting deadline in this webinar. And this webinar is a training, like all NTI trainings, some of them happen to fall around the NTD reporting deadlines. But my apologies, this will be recorded. So at any point, if anyone needs to drop off, you can come back. But I guess the benefits were, you got to learn from each other and learn about in real time and ask your questions from me. But apologies, we have 3 reporting deadlines, and there isn't really a time of year when someone's not crushed. But apologies. And hopefully this was really useful for everyone. We learned a ton. I really appreciate everyone's time. And we have that email inbox open for the next week to take your comments if you want to provide anything privately. We're going to take all this feedback and kind of integrate it, and we're doing a couple more of these, and we'll improve them. And thank you so much for your time, and this was fantastic. Thanks, Michael. Do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. And with that, we'll conclude. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.